Hello. This screencast is designed to look at the idea of carnival as seen in Jez Butterworth's play Jerusalem, set against the backdrop of the Flintock Fair. I thought I'd begin it just with some images of carnival, and you can work out for yourself as I carry on talking where or what you think they might be or where they might have come from, if you see what I mean. How old they are or otherwise. Went through a bit quick there, but we end up at the screen of the Pewsey Carnival. Pewsey is the village that Flintock is based on as a village in Wiltshire, and will of course become therefore relevant to our discussion of carnival in the play. If we think about it, what do the images all have in common? And we can see this great outpouring of a community perhaps coming together to celebrate. But other things that we need to think about here are why Carnival exists in the first place. Carnival can be a pagan festival to celebrate the coming of the new year. Don't forget, the new year begins at the beginning of spring, not on January the 1st, in a sort of natural cycle of things. And therefore the new year is the birth, if you like, of a new year and the death of the old. However, Mardi Gras, the big carnivals in places like Rio and all over the Christian world have become absorbed into the Christian calendar, generally to be a period of excess in some way before the period of fasting that is Lent. And in most of these cases, regardless of the flamboyance with which they are established, the later addition, if you like, of Christian ideas to the pagan original has added layers of meaning, if you like, to Carnival, but layers which might need to be taken back if we're to understand this play better. The whole point of Carnival was this license for misrule that appeared during the Carnival time, the idea of All Fool's Day, the idea of the world being turned upside down. They were pagan spring festivals. Several notable ones still exist to a degree in this country. Probably the oldest, well traceable back beyond Christianity, is the Padstow Obios, Padstow fishing village in Cornwall. The morning song of the Padstow Obios is used in the play, and snatches of it are sung throughout the play. But again, this unite and unite. This isn't about communities coming together to form a union against against the bosses. This is to do with sex. This is to do with the continual need to regenerate and to fertilize. Thus, sexual union is seen as part of the explosion of spring, and any celebration of spring will celebrate fertility. And this takes us back, as we saw in the second screencast, if you've watched the others, to the idea of Rooster as some Dionysus or Pan-like creature sitting at the centre of his pastoral glade, the god of fertility and new beginnings. The Obios festival has been to a degree rebranded to represent George and the Dragon. In the 19th century, a second os was established, the blue os, as opposed to the red os of the original Obios, by the temperance movement. It could hardly be taken over by a more unlikely group than a group devoted to refusal of alcohol. At the end of the celebration, the os actually is killed to indicate the death of the old year. And again, we get this sense of a continuing cycle of creation and death, and this is something that Johnny will celebrate in the play. At the end of the play, with this incantation of his forebears, with the urgency with which he informs his son Marky of his heritage, as if it is necessary to pass the message on to the next generation. So, over time, any festival has generally been encouraged to change by the adoption of Christianity in this country. Even Christmas itself, this 25th of December celebration of Christmas, is an adoption of a pagan festival. In other words, people like having festivals, they like having them at a certain time, and the new religion will adopt those same times for their own festivals. It's interesting how in the late 20th and 21st century, as religion, or organised religion, shall we say, has perhaps relaxed its hold on society in Britain. Paganism in many ways has returned. But perhaps what we're seeing is a new paganism in this country, based on a sort of shallow materialism and popular culture, and it's the sort of paganism that perhaps we see in what has happened in Flintock, described as shit on toast. And you look at the description of the fair, gone are the days of, well, anything remotely spiritual, shall we say. There's a Lord of the Rings float. There's a Georgian Dragon, Men in Black 2. Georgian Dragon is in there, but it's equated with these other symbols of popular culture. The Crown and Goose. It's worth thinking about pubs for a moment. Most pub signs hark back to former moments. But the Crown and Goose have gone X Factor, same as last year. The Morris dancing, often seen as a symbol of English culture, exists because it's the brewery's idea. How long have the Flintock men been going? 6 weeks. This isn't heritage, this isn't culture that's rooted in anything, this is culture that has been pasted onto society as part of a popular excuse to drink and to flirt. And within any culture, every revel must have a leader, and of course the leader of the carnival is the May Queen, always a pubescent local girl. Sexualised highly, presented to the onlookers for their delectation. Now in this case, Phaedra certainly is suggested to be in some way the victim of sexual abuse at the hands of her stepfather. But earlier in the play, when Johnny and Wesley are remembering where they lost their cherry at the age of 12 in a barn, the idea of the May Queen, 15 years old. It's a fantasy sexualized manifestation of what was the original leader of the carnival, the Green Man, the pagan lord of misrule. Now in terms of misrule, what do we get? We get two types of carnival here. We get the Flintock carnival, sponsored by business, copies, if you like, of modern spiritualism, a degree of transvestism, a degree of racism, alcohol and drug fueled. And the only heritage it links back to is 1940 and the last great threat to the island with the Spitfires flying over. But at no point is this ever expanded in the minds of the revellers to actually thinking what life was actually like in 1940. On the other hand, in the wood, there's a flagrant threat to authority. There is a real sense of the individual, whichever individual it is, being free to behave as he or she wishes. Drugs and alcohol play a part in both. There's evidence of some form of mystical power going on in the woods. And there are also attempts in the language spoken and the dialogue to link what is happening in the woods and the characters we meet in the woods to some form of prehistory. Their misrule is a destructive and a violent misrule, but it's a misrule much more in keeping with the pagan origins of the idea of carnival. If, therefore, this is the case and Johnny is the ruler, then we need to be able to see Johnny in that sort of context. And whilst the old songs are being sung around him in snatches as they're trying to reconnect with an older time, what else do we see? We see him, before the play begins, destroy a television, perhaps the symbol of a dying society in terms of a rebirth. Throughout the play, there are references in his speaking to the deep roots of real festival, of St. George, of this idea of Titania, of this idea of, if you like, the Queen of the Fairies. Odin, Gog and Magog, mythical giants, creators of England. And what we see is English heritage in a non-advertising context being held up against modern England. And the tension that ensues is the tension that requires us to consider this play. On page 52, Johnny makes, I think, one of my favourite speeches of the entire play. Make merry, for tonight, like a flaming flock of snakes, we will storm Flintock village and burn every house, shop and farm. We will behead the mayor, imprison the Rotary Club, pillage the pubs, rob the tombola, and whip into a whirlwind a rough-head army of unwashed, unstable, unhinged, friendless, penniless, baffled berserkers will haunt that god-forsaken town, and together, snout by jowl, we will rise up and ride on Salisbury, Marlborough, Devizes, Calne, until the whole plain of Wiltshire dances to the tune of our misrule. This is a fabulous speech. Just at a glance, the alliteration, the power, the variety of sentence length, this huge outpouring that comes out. You look at the imperatives as the ruler is declaring what shall happen with his people. Notice it's first person plural here. I love the triplets. I love the fact that you have these tokens of civilised society, such as the Rotary Club being held up now, although, of course, pillage the pubs gets the exclamation mark, the alliterative power, and is probably the most important. As he launches into his baffled berserker's sentence, the passion of his idea begins to take over from the pure authority. Look at the alliteration. Look at the use of negative prefixes for the dispossessed in the village, highlighting perhaps that sense of what they don't have. Also, they are animals. It's interesting that Butterworth writes snout by jowl, not cheek by jowl, which would be the idiomatic convention in terms of that phrase. Rooster using snout by definition is harking back to an animalistic urgency in these people. There's this lovely idea of the smallness, if you like, of the archaic world. Johnny's world is the plain of Wiltshire. This is the world highlighted elsewhere in the play in the discussions of the demise of Points West, and what is local. Local is Bedwin, we are told. It is to me. It's where I lived. It's where my parents still live. Johnny's world is small. Interestingly, it takes Phaedra at the end of the play, page 101, to see the inherent irony in this gypsy, who is, as she says, meant to be a traveller, so obsessed with staying put in a single place. Maybe misrule is not at the heart of what Johnny wants. You need to be thinking about Carnival as we read this play. You need to be thinking about these ideas of misrule and seeing where these thoughts take you, keeping a record of what you find as you read. Carnival looks both forward and back, and destruction is at the heart of rebirth. The everlasting cycle of life following death and spring following winter will be seen throughout this. Johnny is both a leader and a polluter of society. Davy, on page 30, justifies easily the wish to evict Johnny, and from the village perspective we can see how this ogre in the woods is a blight. He is a total outcast from the village, and he seems to hold court in the forest for the next generation, the children. As he realises, around page 97, the degree to which he is a scapegoat, thrown out to carry the sins of everyone else, he struggles to cope with this. He's pained by it. Okay, stop. I said stop. Enough. And Butterworth writes a silence as a stage direction at this point. You need to think about why that is. Why is that silence so important? There is also a strange irony that Johnny despises everything based on business, but he's also a successful businessman in terms of his peddling of drugs. Dichotomies, tensions, splits. I hope that that has been useful. A quick look at the ideas behind Carnival relating to Butterworth's Jerusalem.